Hi, good morning, and if you're in the United States, and good evening if you're in Asia. Thank you very much for tuning in for today's Myanmar discussion focused on China-Myanmar relations. There have been a lot of big news coming out of Myanmar recently, especially the continuation of the state of emergency announced by the SAC, as well as the alleviation of the prison sentence. Some would call it amnesty, but some would call it just a different form of house arrest on NLD leader Aung San Suu Kyi. So there are definitely a lot of changes happening in the country, and people are wondering what they really mean. So my name is Yun Sun. I'm the director of China program and co-director of East Asia program here at the Stimson Center. We have been running this Myanmar analysis and Myanmar discussion for about a decade now here at Stimson. So with the military coup, I think our mission has been to keep the issue alive, to keep the discussion ongoing, and keep people informed about the development related to Myanmar and inside Myanmar. So for today, the topic is on China and Myanmar, one topic that we have dedicated many years of studies to. But today we're going to invite a Burmese scholar who is currently based in Europe to share with us his perspective on China-Myanmar relations, especially after the military coup, because so many things have changed since the military coup, and we could see that China's attitude has gone through several fluctuation, and now it is in a stage of what Amara Tiha would call strategic re-engagement in Myanmar. So Amara is a doctoral researcher at PRIO, Peace Research Institute of Oslo, and he is taking part in the propaganda project, not propaganda, but propaganda. He is enrolled in the PhD program in sociology at the University of Coimbra, Portugal, and holds a master's degree in history and informatics from Uppsala University and Örebro University in Sweden. Amara has significant experience in government-funded projects by providing technical support to negotiators on security issues and developing roadmap for security sector development in Myanmar. He has over 8 years of experience in research and program management for ceasefire negotiation and monitoring, security dialogue in peace process, conflict monitoring, foreign policy analysis, public diplomacy strategy, and the rule of law in Myanmar. He was also a part of a current PRIO project through a part of a PRIO project in 2020 and 2011 through a partner organization. So my work with Amara has started about 8 years ago when he was a visiting fellow here in Washington. And I know that throughout the years, especially during Amara's time with MIPS, Myanmar Institute for Peace and Security, he had a dedicated team of researchers focused on China-Myanmar relations, not only the security relations, but also the economic relations. And I think their coverage pretty much covered the whole period of the NLD government, and some of them have lingered on into the post-military coup period. So without further ado, Amara, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for taking the time to share with us your observation. I know that you are keeping very close tab on what China is doing and thinking in Myanmar, and it's particularly valuable to hear the perspective from a Burmese perspective. So for the audience, this event is streamed live. You're welcome to submit your questions online, whether it is now or during the Q&A session. So with that, the screen is yours, Amara. Thank you.
Thanks, Yun. Thanks for the introduction. And I will talk about 10 minutes, more or less, and I will try to mention about what's the context and what I would like to make some arguments on that. So before starting on, I would like to start with the two words that are in the title, the strategic and re-engagement in here. So what do I mean for strategic and what do I mean for re-engagement? So when we talk about re-engaging China-Myanmar relation, we usually focus on the late Chinese foreign minister visit to Myanmar in early this year. But when we stretch back a little bit for 2 years, uh, that is not, how can I say, just suddenly happen. It's a long way, it's a up and down and go on. So when there is a coup in 2021, China do not have a prior knowledge. And then, but as soon as after the coup, the SAC tried to engage with the China for some legitimacies and try to figure it out how to go on. But one interesting part is, as soon as after the coup, Chinese investment were put on hold, and Beijing is also start saying that we were not going to support any form of new investment in there. And then Beijing started looking for the political solution in around February, but it was not really going on. And there will be a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment in Myanmar around 2021 March. And then China started to delay all other ongoing projects at the time. One of them was the delay of transferring the submarine that is already now in service. And one of the significant one is China refused to send the troops for the 75th anniversary of Armed Forces Day. They agreed to do so, but they don't. And then they do not send the delegation too. Previously, they were planned on. So that's create SAC a lot of uncomfortable setting. And then at certain point on April, SAC rejected to meet with the Chinese special envoy. And that is the first breakdown in China-Myanmar relationship after the coup. That is the first part. And then on May 2021, the track to diplomacy deployed again, and then China start to re-engage. And the first meeting between ambassador and SAC chairman was in only on June. That is 5 months after the coup. So you can see how difficult period in early months of the coup. And then from July until November, Chinese try to pushing on for the mediation and through ASEAN efforts. That time, Brunei is leading it on, and then China is in principle supporting the ASEAN process. And then they try to bring in foreign minister to China to moving on with ASEAN process, but it's nothing going forward. So that's create a bit uncomfortable setting for China. And then they tried the last attempt around November 2021, but it's not moving forward too. And that's create Myanmar to be out of invitation for the China ASEAN summit in 2021. That is how the developments coming in around 2021. So in 2022, there is nothing much happened. The whole year, almost nothing happened. So Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited to LMC Summit, Lao Mekong Corporation, but he didn't visit to Naypyidaw. It was only on July. And that is simply show that China is engaging Myanmar at the state-to-state relation at the regional level, but they do not show much on the supporting the regime because the Chinese still considering ASEAN track is the only track. But we have to remember that time Cambodia is already in chairmanship, and then Cambodia is quite closer with China, and they are putting on Cambodia chairmanship as a spearhead for engagement. And then there is Myanmar during the time is more closer to the Russia and Ukrainian war and Russia-Myanmar relation of creating a difficult position for China, how to put Myanmar in the in that situation. And then COVID-19 is happening up in Myanmar, and then Chinese economy is going down a little bit, and then the party congress coming in. So 2022 is mostly about China is thinking on how to go on, and that time the ASEAN is the only way that China is pushing on. But at certain point, on around 2022 November, US NDAA discussion is coming in the sphere. The end talking about the NDAA is in the public, and then Myanmar-Burma Act was part of the NDAA, and part of them was to counter Chinese influence. That's creating a triggering factor. And after the party congress in China also trying to thinking it on how to re-engage, and a lot of new actors coming in, and that's lead to the visiting of the new special envoy and meeting with the FPNCC, and then followed up by the foreign minister meetings in Myanmar. So if you're looking on, when I say about engagement, there are two windows. The first window is from the June to November 2021. It's more like attempted mediation supporting ASEAN principle and the COVID diplomacy. And there is some kind of silent diplomacies and multi-layer engagement for a year. And that during the time, China engaged, of course, at the state level with the regional platform, engaging with the SAC and Tamador at the agency level, and that they try to maintain the trust building. And then we call the disengagement at the time. And then since the second period after the 2022 December, we start to realize it's a bilateral engagement, and they try to directly involve in direct mediation with the stakeholders. And not only the ASEAN track, China start to thinking it on with the track 1.5 with the other neighboring countries. This is how they try to re-engage. And they start to engage with the limited engagement with the leadership. So when I say strategic in here, that means the first window is more like a mediated attempt, not that really strategic, how to positioning the China, engage in Myanmar. And the second window is we can see for the long term, how China see the situation in Myanmar will take times to de-escalate and going on. So it's more like trying to put in a strategic atmosphere. And then this is where they are re-engaging on the silent part. That's why the title become strategic re-engagement. And this is how the article was designed. So we can start thinking it on that why China is simply just coming in right away and how they're going to do it in here. So probably some of you read the article, so I'm not going to go on the very detail. But there are three triggering factors in here. The first one is the NDAA. It's a very obvious one. And a lot of stakeholders from the China side and SAC side are really concerned about NDAA. And second reason is Myanmar become part of the great power rivalry and the Cold War narrative. So they are trying to putting on Myanmar as between the competition between China, competition with the Russia issue, and then how Myanmar is trying to positioning there. So this is something that China is not that really comfortable about that. And the third reason is the Chinese investment in SOE. So SOEs are invested in Myanmar for different sectors, and they are stalled for nearly 4 years, starting since 2019 due to the COVID, and then to the election, and then followed by the coup. So they still paying a lot of license fees and all the fees, and they keep maintaining all the assets, but they are a lot of capital costs. So they want to resume it, and they are giving pressure to that. So this is three reasons that is triggering China to start thinking on. We cannot simply rely on ASEAN, but we also need to thinking on how to get in there. So what are the objectives of that? Of course, there you can talk about the long-term objective, but there are three, mid-term objectives that China is looking on. The first one is border security and stability. That is, China assumed that there are some non-state actors that may simply become the tools to create instability around the border, and that can impact on the China economy and China stability around the Chinese side around the border. So this is the first objective, that is to security and stability. Then they assume that probably the Western intervention cannot simply come around the border. So that is the first objective. The second objective is to the transition to the civilian administration. So no matter how the SOE and investor are pushing, they still need the civilian administration. That is for the back Myanmar on the track to assure the stability and to resume the business. So this transition to civilian administration is one of the objectives. And the third one is, of course, the protection of this Chinese investment. But if you're putting in the order, stability around the border is the first priority, transition is the second, and the Chinese investment in the third, because they knew that without stability and security, it is not possible to protect the investment at all. So what is the entry point? So there are three different entry points for that. Of course, there are many ways, but I usually try to put in three to make it more more concrete and a lot easier to what's important. The first one is the direct mediation with the SAC, and then also with the non-state actors. So this is what the special envoy is doing. So his first assignment and his first activity is trying to create the de facto ceasefire between the non-state actors along the China border, and try to directly mediate with the SAC, to create a little bit more stable, at least not to prevent the conflict from the south to the north. And the second part is to the transition to the civilian administration. China is the way that China and neighboring states see the political process is a bit different from the other ASEAN member states, because they are the first 100 countries to experience what happened in Myanmar. So what they are thinking is, of course, ASEAN process and what Indonesian leadership are good. They try to address the structural issues, and they engage the multi-stakeholders. But all of these things cannot be done without the engagement and mediation. This is where the idea of track 1.5 is involved. So they are trying to bring in track 1.5 as an entry point for international mediation for the transition. And the third part is, how are we going to engage Myanmar? So there is a kind of nuance and trying to fine-tuning between not fully support, but we are engaging as legally. So this is where the regional platforms are quite critical in here. So China is trying to putting on an engagement through the regional platform, with LMC is now the primary platform for all these engagement at the different layers. So this is the three entry point for the engagement between SAC and China right now. So one thing, we have monitored the different engagements, both of political and economics, and also different diplomatic missions, and incoming and outgoing. And then we find out there are three layers and three different type of engagements. The first one is more multi-regional platform. So when the official engaging with the central administration in China, it is not like bilateral meeting. So official, like ministerial person, if they are going to meet with these ministerial level in Beijing, they are only engaging at the multilateral regional platform. So it is not like bilateral ministry to ministry engagement at the central administration level. Beijing do not go far to that stage yet. So this is where Myanmar minister, when they go to China and meet with the minister, they meet with either ASEAN or the LMC platform. The second part is we call bilateral visits. So when the ministers go to the bilateral official visit, they are not meeting with the central administration, but they are engaging with the regional administrators. So when the minister from Myanmar meeting with the bilateral meetings and official visit, that is usually in Yunnan administration. You will find Myanmar ministers visit to Yunnan and Taphone region quite frequently in previous 2 to 3 months. That is how they are doing it on. The third part is the business delegation. So usually the delegations are coming as a group, and Myanmar is going there as a business delegation, as a study trip. So if you're looking on the ongoing engagement, so what the China is trying to putting it on is they are engaging at the state level, but not directly supporting and recognizing as a minister to minister bilateral part, but engaging at the regional level. And they are more trying to putting on the engagement as a more like a working level engagement, and trying to make the work done rather than showing off their political positions or symbolic meaning. So this is the situation right now. So of course, there are still a lot of challenges, and then one of the major challenges is not about the security or stability, but it's all about the trust. So the trust building process is still rolling it on, but it will take sometimes to reach to the pre-2015. So this is not like the situation that China is fully back to the SPTC like in early 1990s and early 2000, but it's another way they are looking on, and they are trying to fine tune how to deal with that. So I will stop in here so you can have a more question and discussion later on. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Amara. This is a very fascinating discussion, well, fascinating narrative about China's changing positions basically in the past two and a half years. And like you described, from the initial lack of comprehension and lack of acceptance of the military coup to the gradual adaptation to the reality, and to later in 2022 almost a realization that while China still has significant interest to protect in the country and therefore need to re-engage the SAC, it raises so many interesting questions because we know that China's policy towards Myanmar is not binary. It's not either or. It almost always covers multiple and some would say conflicting or contradictory factors in its own position. Like I think for Western observers, one of the questions that we have heard a lot is, well, if China really cares about border security and cares about economic interests in the country, wouldn't they support a civilian government over the military government, which basically has brought so much chaos and instability to the country? And I think for the junta, the question is, well, if China really cares about the strategic interest and the strategic value of Myanmar, given its location, wouldn't China just embrace the military government, because military government will be much more loyal to China's interest. Well, they will say that will be much more loyal to China's interest compared to a civilian government that is pro-democracy, pro-West, and follows democratic principles. So these are really I would say the nitty gritty, but the conflicts embedded in China's policy towards the country. So we already have a lot of questions coming in from the audience, which we will get to. But to begin with, if I can use the purview of the chair, I'd like to pose a question. You talked about how China wants the country to return to civilian rule. How would that be achieved in China's desired endgame? Because apparently what we have seen in the past 2+ years is SAC is not going to willingly give up its power. And NLD, especially Aung San Suu Kyi, are not going to just embrace what has happened to the country. And let's not forget about NUG and Resistance and PDF, who have vowed to fight this military regime basically to the last resort of their resources. So for China's desired civilian rule, what is return to civilian rule, how would that come about? Or it will be through a pseudo election that people have been talking a lot about, that something like the 2010 election, and then we're going to have a pseudo democracy, pseudo civilian government in the country. Is that something that the Chinese will embrace? So Amra, I'd love to hear your opinion about that.
I think there are some few principles that China usually don't mention about that. Is they usually do not mention that there should be the election or there should not be an election because they consider that is the intervention. But China have their own vision of what they want to see in Myanmar. And that is not 100% like a elected, democratically elected or liberal democracy, but they really want to see it's more like a harmonious state. So they knew that Myanmar can only govern with the different ethnic groups, different diversity, different there. So they need to find some form of fine tuning a harmony that is trying to make a stability out there. So that is the idea. So from this perspective, Aung San Suu Kyi is still valid leader for them because they assume she still represent the interests of the majority of the people. The majority of the people still assume her leadership still on. So they are planning that they understood that election itself were not going to change anything, but there should be some form of political negotiation or mediation should achieve along with the election, and the outcome should be more harmonious and creating a power sharing to have some more harmonious situation. This is the principle that they are looking at for. So not election, not just system change, but trying to fine tune, and then they are looking forward for that.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, right? It's like this quiet mediation, this quiet exertion of their influence, trying to tell SAC that, hey, well, you need to come to some kind of political solution in the end. And you're absolutely right. The Chinese would never say that election is the way to go, but in their desired endgame, what would be the way to go for SAC to have a deal with an LD? Because so far I have not seen overt support or expression of support that China has extended to NUG. Is that correct?
It's true, yes, but there is a party-to-party relationship between the NLD and the China at some degree, and there is some level of engagement at the local levels and there's some party level leadership, too, but party level in China too. So there are different layers of different engagement and a different interest in there. But uh, for China, they are looking on as an interesting part is they are looking on another perspective is let's assume there is a 500,000 SAC soldiers, and let's assume there are 500,000 EAO soldiers, and then let's assume there are 500,000 anti-SAC coalition. Its total is 1.5 million are in Myanmar, but that is still only 3% of the whole population. So what about other 97% that who do not have a voice and who has the political mandate to represent and trying to overcome on this? This is some kind of leadership issue that they are thinking it on, that who is representing majority of the people. Of course, SAC did not, but so they are looking for who are the other counterpart to create a mediation to go on.
Yeah, that is definitely a question that a lot of people have been thinking about. What are the entry point, and who are the credible players in this game? Um, so moving the topic a little bit back to the domestic politics in Myanmar, you've seen the recent political dynamics and all these big events coming out of Yangon and coming out of Naypyidaw. Um, what do you think about the current political dynamics and the Myanmar line? That there's a rumored personnel reshuffle coming along. There are discussions, speculations about a caretaker government or some sort of coalition government. They are announcing some alleviation of Aung San Suu Kyi's criminal or her legal terms in terms of prison time. So, what do you think SAC is trying to achieve here?
What SAC is trying to do is the objective is try to keep maintaining the 2008 constitution and then trying to host the elections and going on. But there are three reasons that there can be the interim government is not very soon and election not very soon. The first reason is this is a senior junior issue in Myanmar military. So Myanmar military was not simply let their seniors to lead at the puppet. At the same time, the seniors leadership who were retired were not simply not going to be the puppet of the junior leadership. So they were not definitely going to do so. So the rumors of having a elderly interim administrations is not possible. The second part is the election process is pretty slow. So if we're looking on the Union Election Commission process, and there will be the census, and there will be the another constituencies forming, it will take some time. And so the earliest thing that they can start to doing is in 2025. And the third reason is SAC still need to wait the expiration date of the 2020 election. Right now, they still 2020 election results is still valid. So they have to wait. These election results are already expired. That means the earliest election date that to be not to be legitimately contested will be 2025. So the earliest election will be 2025. So before 2025, they were still going on the extension in different ways, and they try to play different way of mediation, try to reach certain form of mediation with the EAOs and maybe NLD at some point. This is the strategy that SAC is taking on, and they will do so in the upcoming year. And finally, the most important part is secession plan. The secession plan from Thermidor is critical before the next administration is coming in. Without the secession plan, it will take some time. In 2010, it takes about 8 to 12 months, or maybe a little bit more than a year to prepare for that. So we don't see any succession plan yet.
So that's really interesting. So if you are speculating that the election is not going to happen until 2025, so do you foresee that SAC will just extend the state of emergency in the absence of general election?
I think so. There are different ways. They even in the previous meeting, they bring in the two different scenario. One is to have a general election nationwide, all constituency, and another one is to have a different level of constituency to going it on. So if they want to host an election, they can do it. But the completion of election is no earlier than 2025, end of the year.
Let's see. So it will be a dragged along process, but that's also pushing it quite close to, because 2026 Myanmar is supposed to or scheduled to take on the chairmanship of ASEAN, right?
True. Yes. Yeah.
Do you think
True.
that factor being in the mind of people? Because if the election is declared as neither free nor fair, then for them it will be very embarrassing and politically difficult for both the country and the region and the regional organization.
This is true. So what we are looking on is that what the Lao is going to do in next year. So next year will be a little bit easy for the SAC in the region because Lao is leading the chairmanship. Of course, Lao will take the findings and all the structural findings of the Indonesia to keep going on, but they will be more closer to the track 1.5 thing. But after the Laos, there will be Malaysian leadership. So that is sometimes that SAC have to be struggling on. That will be early 2025. So the 2025, then probably when the election coming in, if that is going on and it's easy to go on, and then Myanmar can have a chairmanship. Otherwise, probably they will skip it on. So it all depends on how Laos leadership is leading in from September, October.
Wow, that's definitely something to watch for. Well, that would be all my questions so far, but we have a lot of questions from the audience, and they're really well informed question. So to begin with, coming to the most current questions that a lot of people are thinking about, from Larry Jargon at Bangkok Post. Hi, Larry. Larry's question is: if Beijing is slowly moving towards recognizing the Myanmar military, will Beijing invite Myanmar to China for a state visit, or we can deflate the lower the bar a little bit, say official visit, whereas the leader of the country. You have heard rumors like that too, right?
Yes. So it is a difficult position for Beijing to on how to invite. It's a one issue because since 2021 November, they did not invite the very high level political person to the different summit. So even they re-engage there in what level of platform is another issue. So one thing that they can do is either they're going to invite as a military to military invitation. That is also not possible very soon because that is a very politically symbolic, so they may avoid. One step down is whether they're going to invite as some leader from the different regional venue. So one of the possible one is there is the BRI summit in September. That is something we can looking it on. If there is no invitation, that is not possible. But just an official bilateral visit is it will be a bit difficult in China. We're not going to take the risk for political symbolism.
That is very true. But we do recall that the foreign minister of the military government has been invited to China on official invitation for a number of times. So maybe they will invite someone else, but not at the Myanmar level, right?
Sure, they may invite the higher military officer, but who do not hold the political position. So that is something that military to military engagement can going on. So if there is an official visit, there can be some official visit that who do not hold the strong political position.
I see. In your remarks, you mentioned the Chinese interest in this in their continued investment. Of course, you also mentioned it will be preconditioned upon some level of stability and some level of civilian government, civilian rule in the country. But you also mentioned that the SOEs are reigniting their interest and their investment in the country. So we have a question from Murray. Hi, Murray. Morning. From Murray Hibbert about um, the state or the status of the SOE projects in the country. Can you give us a few examples as for the ones that they are actively working on, and also the ones that they are not so active, but basically slowly rolling them in?
One of the major one is the Chaopiu port. So Chaopiu port is now the agreement of the Chaopiu port is now revisited, and then now they are in the different process of what's to what extent the scope will be bigger again and what other project. This is the major one. The Chaopiu port is the major one. The second part is the mining, and then third one is the how to upgrade the China-Myanmar economic corridor. So the route is a different trade route. So previously going through the Muse at the northern part, and now it's going to the eastern part a little bit to trying to link with the LMC channel. So this is where the Chinese SOE are re-engaging and trying to make an effort. But of course, there are other stall projects too, like mostly the big projects, a development project in southern Yangon and all this new city. All of them are stalled and probably not going to happen. So the only three project is related to the economic corridor.
So it's a railway from Yunnan to Mandalay. Is that back online? The last time I checked, it was
Well,
still in the feasibility studies stage.
they are still in the feasibility, and then I think the railway will take time. So the most visible thing, if we can see in the upcoming year, is the upgrading the road from Lasho to Chinshui Hall. So this is a new road, and then they're gonna extend it, and they just they just constructed and opening the bridge in Chinshui Hall. So this is the major project that if we've seen it, but the railway project is it may take some time. I think it's not gonna take off in few years, and the Chinese policy also shifting too.
Yeah, well, for people who are not familiar with the geography of that part, Qinchuhe is one of the main land ports between China and Myanmar. Um, so okay, if that is the status of the economic projects, and that pretty much means that the Chinese are still basically slowly moving back in, because most of these infrastructure projects they are not going to be profit making in the near term. They're more laying the groundwork for CMEC. But is that a correct assessment?
True, but in here, I would like to put more on the part of the LMC, not just even a CMEC, it's a bilateral level. So it is part of the LMC and Myanmar part of the Lao Mekong Corporation, so LMC. So this is a little bit a step below the CMEC. So this is where all the things are happening right now. So that is also the new Chinese approach in the regional development. So this is part of the GDI and GSI initiative in the Southeast Asia. So we are trying. China also changing from just injecting capital infrastructure to more development initiate platforms to extend the how can I say footprint in the region. So this is another shifting in policy.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it basically means that the Chinese are shifting a little bit away from their previous economic interest driven model. Now it's about China's global responsibility as a development partner, and especially for GDI, is not about profit seeking. It's about China making contribution to the less developed countries.
True. So if we're looking all the activities in the past 3 months, and about 80% of the economic and all these infrastructure related projects, all the ministerial visits are more about LMC and the part of the GDI's initiative. So it is also the interesting part that China trying to reshape this image as just simply the lender or for the big projects to more like a development person that who trying to create their own development ideas. That is the ideological shift, and also trying to push the ideological front to contest the development theories that usually we study in West. Yeah.
Yeah, the alternative development model, as the Chinese would call it, the community of shared future, or common destiny, whichever you call it. That's interesting, but that inevitably raises a question, especially for here people in Washington, the debt trap diplomacy issue. Because if these development efforts, they're essentially still based on Chinese lending to large infrastructure projects in the country, then Myanmar, whether it's the current military government or future governments, whether they're civilian or not, will still be obligated to carry the burden of these debts. No?
Of course, yes.
Would that be an issue? Because remember, for Jiaopiu, the reason that the original design for Jiaopiu port was cut from, I believe, 7.2 billion to 1.5 billion was the NLD government's concern over this massive debt that Myanmar will have to take on.
True. Yes. So that's the one reason that they just shrink everything. At the same time, we also should not how can I forget about that? There's a lot of CMEC projects are also approved during the NLD administration too. It's not in Deng Xian administration. So Chao Q was reduced. At the same time, a lot of CMAC projects were introduced. So, but one interesting part is the idea of BRI and CMEC is not part of the how can I say the top agenda in this context. And then lending to Myanmar is a bit a risky job. So they will start looking on how what are the priorities, how these priorities should be implemented, and what are the financial sustainable model. Because when not only the host country have to pay back, is if that is default, it's a Chinese money that is being defaulted. So China is also start thinking it on how to keep the economic models keep working it on rather than just pouring a lot of capitals.
Well, having been working on China for decades, good luck on that one. Um, so there's a comment or question from Kimberly Stanton about your Amara's PowerPoint. Will it be distributed? It will be viewable in the recorded video, and the recorded video will be posted both on Stimson website and also on YouTube. Amar, in fact, published a paper on Stimson website about this topic, China's strategic re-engagement in Myanmar. So I believe my colleague is going to, if she hasn't already, post the link to the article online, so you can look at the details of what Amar was discussing. Um, so moving on a little bit, let's move a little bit to the border, because you mentioned that border security, of course, is China's top concern. And as a China analyst myself, I have observed the increasing interest or increasing anxiety in China about the illegal activities along the border, especially related to online fraud and also casinos, online gambling. That basically after the model of Shukoko, if I think I'm sure people will all remember that example. So now there are more of those facilities or more of those institutions and organizations along the China-Myanmar border. And now in China, the word Northern Myanmar has become the equivalent of hell. That young Chinese nationals are either coerced or they were cheated into going to northern Myanmar, where they are involved in gambling. They have to basically support the online illegal gambling business, and some of them lose their organs. Some of them just die, and very few of them were able to escape back to China. um, so do you think that, well, first I would like to know that most of the people who are opening these illegal operations in northern Myanmar, they at least they're joint ventures with Chinese nationals. They're not necessarily Burmese nationals, and some of them, of course, they're either the ethnic armed groups who control the territory, or they are people who are related to the EAOs. But the Chinese nationals definitely have a big part to play in these operations. Um, so, do you think that this is an issue that is driving China's policy? towards Myanmar? Because in the past 3 years, COVID has made it easy for China to just seal the border. But now COVID is over and China has reopened, and this issue has become a bigger and bigger security or public security concern in China. What do you think about that angle?
True. There's a let's say two major thing in here. Of course, that the illegal business activities is the top agenda of the all official visit to Myanmar. There's a try to crack down the illegal business, northern Myanmar, southern Myanmar, and so on. So for one reason, the first reason is, as you mentioned about the Chinese youth have got a lot of, a lot of scam issues in their illegal trade, illegal organ trading. The second reason is, as most of the operators are somehow linked to the mainland China, it has become the narrative that China is trying to create in Southeast Asia. This is have a regional instability impact, and then they link with the Beijing. This is a narrative that you see a lot of, in the media. So this is something that China also don't want it, because they do not want to be linked with these groups, because they say within China in mainland we can control 100%. That outside we have the same policy should be adopted, and we don't want to be linked with all this illegal thing. That is a more like politically symbolic for China. So that is the one reason it's become always a top priority out there. But there's some issues out there too. The first one is all of these activities are taking place inside Myanmar. That is that these areas have some form of autonomy and then very slow influence from the central administration. That's a one point. So they cannot easily going on. Second part is there are a lot of these are the cash cow business. They create a lot of cash. So these cash are flowing inside Myanmar, and that create buoyancy for all these economy in Myanmar. So if you're looking the official sheet of Myanmar economy is always in trouble, but because of these cash flow coming in to invest in lands or to invest in the different markets, that's created economy is floating. So it is very difficult for Myanmar central administration to easily shut it down, because it can easily impact it, and there is no substitute how to make a buoyancy out there. So that's another perspective that is difficult. The third one is there is a big flow of money. So usually we got a host, that is usually the local community. That's usually we have an investor that is coming from the mainland China, or maybe somewhere from Macau or Cambodia. And the third one is we got the operator. Usually the gambling apps are not hosted in Myanmar, but it's hosted in either in Cyprus or the Malta, where the financial regulations are kind of flexible, or maybe in somewhere in the Caribbean. So that is not easily to crack down all the apps, because the money is simply flowing in all. So it is a kind of interesting dynamic to looking on that how to crack it down. It's not that easy to just shutting down the physical casino out there.
Yes, like most of the illegal business that have been going on in that region, that everybody has a stake in it, right? The Chinese businessmen have a stake, but the local EAOs, they also take their cut because it's on their territory. And the Burmese military have been taking a cut out of the illegal mining, illegal logging, illegal basically everything that goes on there. So it's a part of the conflict economy. Well, it does make people wonder that if this is such a big concern for the Chinese government, because if they want to exert their influence, they can force the Burmese government to take more actions on this particular issue. And I think the expectation in China is growing higher and higher for China to use its influence and to influence to change what is happening in northern Myanmar. Also, a question from Kimberly about the NDAA, which you mentioned, and Stimson also has a paper coming out on NDAA, and some of the regional perspectives about the NDAA and its implication and its role. The question for Amara is that what specifically about the NDAA Burma section concerns concerns China? That if you look at the content, of the Burma focused sections, they should not have come as a surprise. And what exactly bothers them?
It's an appendix as a Burma Act that does create a very specific, because NDAA, we all knew this. There will be a lot of trying to de-risking all the Chinese influence, and then trying to balancing the strengthening the U.S. president in Southeast Asia. That's China already expected on this thing, but explicitly mentioned in the Burma Act, and that what United States can do on the non-state actor, that is something that China is really concerned about, that because a lot of non-state actors are just simply around their border. So they consider that is creating a way to just simply come on their back door. That is the most concerning facts for China.
Yeah, and if I may just add to that, I think there are two things. The first one is this reference to non-lethal aid to the democratic oppositions, and which is an ambivalent term, right? It could include everything from communications equipment to things that are more military oriented. I think for the Chinese, they see this as opening the door to a much more broader interpretation of what it means. And if the earlier Burmese, especially the resistance hope, came true, then it would indicate U.S. military aid or military assistance, including the provision of potentially lethal aid to the Burmese resistance. I think that's a top concern. And the second concern that I have observed is the Chinese are, when they look at the politics in Myanmar, and Amr, please do correct me if I'm wrong. When they look at the domestic politics of Myanmar, they still think that the SAC or the military and NLD are the intrinsic or indispensable political actors for the future of the country. And for them, when they look at NUG and all this resistance, I think there's a very high level of uncertainty coming to China's assessment about where NUG will take the country. So, which is why I think the Chinese have been very cautious about their engagement with NUG. They have not expressed their support. They have not expressed their recognition because they are not entirely sure that where NUG is going to go. So when U.S. expressed support for NUG and for the democratic oppositions, I think in China that translates into a destabilizing factor. That this is an uncertain player for the future of the country that could potentially make things even more unstable. And of course, there are many things wrong with this logic because with NUG's popularity and people, like Amar, you mentioned, Tatmadaw is 3% of the population, right? But if you look at the broader population in the country, there is a strong desire for democracy and for democratic elections. So I think the Chinese have omitted all that basic facts on the ground, but basically fast forward to the conclusion that NUG is not necessarily the most stabilizing factor in the country. So I think that's another reason that basically how China sees the future of domestic politics of Myanmar. That's a question.
Sure.
I hope
The, the,
that's
Sure. Yeah.
that's a
I mean,
fair.
yeah. The thing is, China just simply say not the NUG only, because there are a lot of actors on the anti-SAC. Those is a big anti-SAC coalition out there, right? So they are not very, and there is another epistemological thinking that because of the China is looking on more like a structural way. Yes, it's a Tamador, it's an NLD, always contesting for the for the politics, the game. But there's another group that is very decentralized, coming from the bottom up. That is very difficult for the China to digest. That who is who and who is doing what, and then
Yeah.
how they're gonna engage with these multi-stakeholder and so on. That's a very difficult for Chinese to digest on this kind of structure. That's one major concern for the China too.
That is very true. Yeah, they look at the democratic system or democratic institutions like, well, who is calling the shot? Who should we talk to? And how do we deal with these different opinions within the institution that is not I wouldn't call it China's strongest suit. About the NUG, I'm sorry, about the EAOs. Do you see that? Well, Amram, like you mentioned, we've seen some of the Chinese mediation effort since the military coup, And I personally have wondered what that was all about, because no credible EAO within IPNCC or in the North are going to negotiate with ICC, because they know that ICC is not going to be there forever. So negotiation or any negotiated outcome with ICC may or may not be honored by the future government. So do you see that China taking specific active actions to bring these two together? Basically, with China's mediation effort, are they genuine? Are they producing results, or they're just keeping the game going?
I mean, different way of how we define peace and ceasefire and negotiation and all the thing, right? For China, they thought if there is a de facto ceasefire, even with a gentleman agreement, you can last a ceasefire for more than 20 years or 30 years, like UWSA. So there is not even a single agreement at the time, right? So it's a gentleman agreement at the time. So for China, a stable de facto agreement is even works. The political negotiation you can carry it later on. So of course, northern groups are also want to maintain the status quo, and they knew that talking with the political negotiation were not going to forward. So they say we will keep the de facto ceasefire, just put the status quo. And SAC also knew that they say yeah, we were also talking with the de facto ceasefire too, because usually military government never discuss the political negotiation during their term. They usually bring it on. This is what they have done in 1990s, 2000, and they will do the same thing. So this is just something you're trying to keep the process going on to maintain the ceasefire with the engagement. So this is the strategy for all the stakeholders right now. So
Okay. Well, yeah, so it sounds like they're just keeping the game going instead of pushing for any breakthrough, and no breakthrough is going to come through during this period. Maybe down the
yes.
road, but not currently. We have 3 minutes left, and we have still a couple of questions to go through. So I would like to dedicate maybe the last question to the India question, because there are a couple of questions in the Q&A about where India currently sits vis-a-vis China's role in Myanmar. Because earlier on, there's this perception that India has been wooing the generals because of the concern that if they don't, China will just come in and absorb the country into its sphere of influence. What do you think about India's role in Myanmar currently?
I mean, India have always a very good relation with the Myanmar armed forces for generation, and they always consider as the counterweight to the Chinese influence. So they just want to maintain the status quo. The first is one thing, so they just don't want to lose it all. The second part is, instability in the western part of Myanmar and not western part of Myanmar is also have an impact on India's side. So India don't want to have a weapon inflows and all these instability down there. That's the second part. The third part is, India also want to look east, and they want to expand to, connect with the Thailand and the whole Southeast Asia. So this is where they still need to going on, and they want to moving it on. So Indian factor is quite critical. And so let's say, if Chinese can, convince the northern groups to de-escalate. India is one of the actor to can convince the SAC to back on the mediation track, or Tamador to de-escalate too. So it is not only China, but China, India, and Thailand. These three actors are critical for de-escalation and bringing all these mediation. So this trio is necessary for keep the process going on if we seek for the mediation in the future.
So do you see a China-India competition, or it sounds like their approach has converged?
Of course, in this situation, competing will not gonna make any progress for both China and India interests. Both China and India need to the stable, to certain level of stability, to a certain level of transition back to normal. So this is the interest of both India and China. So this is where they are trying to cooperate out there. And the same thing for Thai too. So this is not the time that India and China is competing, but they're trying to figure it out how to deal with the Myanmar issue. So yeah.
So it sounds like both China and India are currently okay with this track 1.5, or some would call basically official engagement with ICC, in order to well, some would say pursue their own national interest, but some others would say that to provide some level of mediation effort.
at some point, if we want to go on mediation, at some point, one of the actor is SAC. We cannot simply neglect the problem, right? So we need some form of leverage and convincing to bring on the table. That is one side, and of course, there's another side. There, how are we going to bring in on the anti-SAC coalition, and then that is coming on, and how are we going to accommodate everything within the new values and the all these uh, baselines points that we need to address on. That is what Indonesia is working it on. So this is not the competing process. I mean, what Indonesia is going on is for the more long-lasting positive peace that is critical. At the same time, what China and India leverage is critical to bring SAC on the mediation table, and what United States and West engaging with the NUG and NUG is necessary to bring in the single voice when the time is coming in on. So all of these actors are critical, but the only matter is how are we going to coordinate together and bring to the one platform in the upcoming years.
And for that, we will continue our observation and see how the country's future will evolve. Well, Amara, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing with your insights and your observations about China-Myanmar relations. I think everyone will agree with me. This has been extremely rich and very informative and comprehensive assessment of where China is in terms of its engagement in Myanmar. A lot of questions remain, and we will continue to follow on this issue and hope that the audience will join us for our future discussion. Just as an event promotion for our next Myanmar discussion in September, we will be discussing the future of National League for Democracy, with one of its members currently living on the east coast of the United States. We'll talk about where the party is going, where we think that the party will fit in future politics of the country. So hopefully a lot of you will tune in. So with that, thank you, Amra. We hope that we'll continue to invite you to come back to make contribution to our Myanmar discussion, both in writing and also in terms of public events. And we hope you have very successful study and your field research in the region and also in Europe. With that, thanks everybody. Thank you for joining and have a